Hey, welcome back, everyone. Let's talk about government funded media and one of the big debates right now happening on Twitter. You might have seen that Twitter, with Elon Musk behind it, is starting to put up warnings or, just notes on the web pages, Twitter pages, of many major news outlets, noting if they received government funding. That's PBS, that's NPR, that's CBC, that's BBC, that's ABC in Florida. It's quite a few of them. And a lot of people are saying, well, how dare you say that we're publicly funded media because that undermines our credibility? Well, you're publicly funded media. If you don't want it to undermine your credibility, don't take money from the government. And that's the argument going around right now. I'll show you what's happening with this because the way it has unfolded is very interesting. You watched what started as a debate on whether someone should be able to note whether a media receives government funding or not, transform into a broader discussion about who controls the narratives that media produce. And it even has peeled back the lid to an extent and showed the public, and I want to show you all as well, how a system of government funded research organizations feeds into the government funded media, which then amplify government messages under the disguise of legitimate journalism. It's been a very interesting kind of spectacle that's unraveled right in front of our eyes, and so I want to make sure that we cover this, folks. Also, might have seen some of the news about rioting and teenagers and by the thousands robbing stores and so on. I guess there's another, killing that they're using to justify, or another shooting they're using to justify this now. But actually, the rioting started before the shooting took place, and so, as far as I'm concerned, it's just lawlessness essentially. But in Chicago, where Walmarts are closing down because they can no longer stay open because of theft and vandalism, you have people now posting videos showing just the damage taking place, and they're saying, "Where can I buy food for my children?" Now that essentially places are being ransacked. And the mayor of Chicago came out and responded to this, and basically looked like he endorsed looting. This is a public official publicly not at least condemning crime, and to an extent, well, actually directly making an excuse for crime. I'd say this goes against the basic contract, the social contract we have with government. The very reason we pay taxes is to ensure that our life, our liberty, and our property are protected. And if government can ensure none of those things, it raises the question of, what are we financing y'all for with our taxes? It's raising a pretty serious discussion, I think, about the nature and role of government, whether they're fulfilling their role still, and what can be done to fix it. I'll show you this as well. Also, folks, I mentioned yesterday, big news, Crossroads is going to be on cable starting next month. And I want to clarify, we will still be on Epoch TV. You can still 100% watch us there. We'll still have clips on YouTube and so on, but the full episodes, everything, even premiering live, still going to be on Epoch TV, so don't worry. Also, it's gonna change times. It's gonna be 7 p.m. Eastern time. I do apologize for those of you who I know. I mean, I love the discussion. I would have kept it the same, but they want it to be a prime time show. We'll see where things go. But yeah, it's going to be 7 p.m. For the beginning of next month. For the first 2 weeks, I'll just be doing monologues, and then after about 2 weeks, we'll transition into the full live show. And we're planning to expand it to an hour eventually. It's going to be a big opportunity. It's going to be a big move for us. Really, this is a big shift, and I think one that's going to be really good in terms of helping push the power of Crossroads on a broader scale. Those of you asking, it'll be on NTD. And so if you want to find the cable view times, it's going to be in FiOS and so on. But go to ntd.com/cabletv.htm. And it's going to be on cable in quite a few states. But also if you have FiOS, you can get it pretty much just about anywhere on FiOS. And of course, though, again, we will still be on Epoch TV, so don't worry about that. And that said, folks, thanks for being here. Thank you for your support, and we're on this journey together. So It's always a pleasure. That said, let's jump into the first story. I want to show you how this discussion around state-funded media is unraveling and around what it's exposing, because I don't think anyone really anticipated for it to go the way it's gone. Let's start from the top. It all began with NPR, National Public Radio. Let me show you their Twitter page. Twitter labeled NPR as a government-funded media. And NPR was very unhappy about that. They challenged it. They said, how dare you say that we are a government-funded media? We don't. They were trying to argue that they are independent and, this and that. And people said, well, you can argue you're independent, but the fact stands. You exist through government funding. Government funding, taxpayer dollars are what keep your company going. And if you want to claim that, you're independent, fine, your reporting contradicts that. And people were quick to note some of the issues with NPR's reporting, their track record of backing state-run narratives, and what appears to be a lack of independence from state narrative and, pretty much party politics, mainly on the left. People were defending it and even arguing on whether or not it's state-funded, and then this came out. Let me show you, hotair.com. How much money does NPR get from the government? It's very complicated. And they go into this very complicated analysis that, yes, they receive lots and lots of money, and yes, most of their money does come from the government, but technically government money comes from taxpayers. And you've seen this weird narrative emerge, like even in the defense of like BBC in the UK, and even in the defense of CBC in Canada, people are saying it's not government funded, it's taxpayer funded. Well, guess what? Our tax dollars go to the government so they can delegate our money to things, and government funded means taxpayer funded. The government does not generate money in any country. The government does not generate money. Their money is taxpayer dollars. And so if you're trying to go on a technicality that's not government funded, it's taxpayer funded, it's the same thing. And that was part of the ridiculous way that ironically, the legacy news outlets tried to defend this and claim that government funded is an improper label. Really just a ridiculous play on words. After NPR went through this whole thing, they threw their hands up in the air essentially and said, we're leaving. We're going to leave Twitter. See you all later. And people said, don't let the door hit you on the way out. And then PBS, Public Broadcasting, announced they were going to go with them. And as they tried to define themselves, people pointed to something else. They said, well, PBS, you're leaving with NPR, and you're also claiming on the grounds that you're independent. But hey, we remember as well that you are a state-funded media. And we also know as well that you have also pushed false information. False information ironically being promoted by government narrative. And if you're a news outlet and you cannot show the truth of the matter when the government says one thing and it turns out to be false, you are not demonstrating independence from the very group that is financing you. That is the concern that is arising from us. Let me show you this. Kennekoa the Great on Twitter. He said, defund PBS for running a malicious disinformation campaign against the American people and interfering in the 2020 election. Let me play this for you.
Over the past few days, President Trump has highlighted a report by the New York Post about Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son. There are major questions about the origins and the accuracy of that story, that the president's personal attorney was peddling Russian disinformation.
Unfounded claims about Vice President Biden's son, Hunter.
Unverified story about Hunter Biden.
Adam Schiff suggested the claims are Russian disinformation.
Disinformation. Intelligence agencies warned the White House that Russian intelligence used Rudy Giuliani as a vessel to undermine the Biden campaign. Public.
Now, I will emphasize, everything you just heard is a lie. They just lied through their teeth to defend what was real information, that Hunter Biden's laptop was, of course, leaked. Hunter Biden's laptop contains multiple photographs of him sleeping around with women and hookers and smoking crack and doing push-ups naked between a dresser and a couch, which I saw, which was horrible. And he's also doing things like having emails which discuss business deals under which he notes that they might have to register as foreign agents, in his own words, and things like this. And of course, you had intelligence agencies or members of the intelligence community come out in actually what are now emails being linked to the Biden administration, come out and claim that there was an intelligence assessment of senior members of the intelligence community stating this whole thing is Russian disinformation. And then you had different social media pages ban different media or kick them off briefly on the grounds that they were spreading Russian disinformation. And then you have PBS. Did PBS, while they were spreading actual disinformation, while they were lying to the public ahead of an election over a story that would have altered the outcome of the election based on, again, polling numbers, while they were doing that, did they criticize Twitter or Facebook or YouTube for deplatforming or censoring people for spreading what turned out to be true information? Did they ever repent, let's say, for their crimes against the public of spreading what was, in fact, government disinformation to cover for the political party that they support while receiving taxpayer dollars, meaning they're government funded, while doing so? Not that I saw. And now they're trying to make this big, all this noise around, how dare you say we're government funded, even though, yes, we're government funded. And they're trying to make, this big dramatic exit, watch as I leave the building. And that's what's happening right now, folks. Now, that being said, it only got more interesting from here. I would argue that BBC was kind of the pinnacle. What happened with BBC was like the icing on the cake. BBC came out, British Broadcasting, right? The state-funded media in the UK. And they also got labeled as a government-funded media, which they are, by the way. But they said, hey, we're not government-funded. We are funded by taxpayers. Trying to use that ridiculous play on words yet again by skewing the idea that somehow government gets its money from somewhere other than taxpayers. But regardless of of course, there's some nuances with BBC. Like you could choose not to. From what I understand, if you're in the UK, you can choose not to have your money go to them. So there's some nuance with it, just for their narrative. But then something interesting and that turned out to be just detrimental to BBC happened. BBC asked for an interview with Elon Musk. And the results were incredible. I'll go over that in just a sec, folks. Before we go into that, though, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. Now, as we've been talking about, inflation is going to continue and likely get worse. Even Fed Chair Powell is warning us to brace ourselves. Well, there's one way you can hedge against inflation. American Hartford Gold makes it simple and easy to diversify your savings and retirement accounts with physical gold and silver. With one short phone call, they can have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or into your IRA or 401k. American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. If you call them right now, they'll give you up to $2,500 of free silver and a free safe on qualifying orders, so don't wait, call them now. That's 877-260-2764. Again, that's 877-260-2764. Or text Joshua to 65532. Again, 877-260-2764. Or text Joshua to 65532. And again, big thanks out to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring today's episode. Now that said, let's talk about the BBC. We'll start from the top. All the drama unfolded. BBC came out very strong against Elon Musk, and they raised just all over British media. The government was saying it. All these public officials are coming out criticizing Elon Musk, saying, how dare he say the BBC is government-funded media, and how dare he call into question the integrity of our media by telling people the truth. And then, of course, they came out. And they requested actually an interview with him while they were trying to pull all these narratives out Twitter has become a hotspot of hate speech. Twitter, hate speech and racism and all these other things on Twitter have increased, and that's all because of Elon Musk. And then they asked Elon Musk for an interview, and Elon Musk agreed to that interview, interestingly, like the same day, within a very short time span. And the results actually ended up making BBC look very, very bad. Because Elon Musk did something interesting. Elon Musk did not agree to go on BBC. Elon Musk agreed to do a Twitter space with a BBC reporter broadcasted live, meaning they could not selectively edit it, and everybody got to watch in real time how the interviewer performed, how Elon Musk called into question the legitimacy or lack thereof of their narratives, and how Elon Musk made this individual frankly look like a fool. Let me show you. We'll go over a couple parts of this. Let me play a part of this interview. Elon Musk tweeted this out.
That, we have spoken to people who have been sacked that used to be in content moderation, and we've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech in the company. Is that
what hate speech are you
address?
talking about? I mean, you use Twitter,
right?
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
But just a personal anecdote, like what do you? I don't.
Personally, my For You, I would see I get more of that kind of content, yeah, personally. But I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
So you see more hate speech personally?
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful? What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
No,
is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying anything. I'm saying.
Well, I'm just curious. I'm trying to understand what you mean by hateful content, and I'm asking for specific examples. And you just said that if something is slightly sexist, that's hateful content. Does that mean that it should be banned?
Well, you've asked me whether my feed, whether it's got less or more. I'd say it's got slightly more.
That's why I'm asking for examples. Can you name one example?
I honestly don't use. Honestly, I
you
don't.
Can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why. Because I don't actually use that For You feed anymore. Because I just don't particularly like it.
But you
and
said
actually, a lot of people are quite similar. I only look at
hang on a second.
my
You said you've seen.
Folks, do you get that? Oh my gosh. He goes, hateful content is on the rise on Twitter. It's becoming a serious problem. I've been seeing all this hateful content. Elon Musk says, well, like what? Give me an example of hateful content. He goes, well, sexism. He's like, well, should people be banned for or slightly sexist? He's like, well, he kind of avoids the question. And then he goes further. He's like, well, I've seen all this hateful content. Elon Musk says, well, tell me one thing you've seen. He goes, I've seen it. And then he admits that he hasn't actually seen anything. He says he saw it on his feed, right? I saw it on my feed, right? And after he says he saw it on his feed, Elon Musk corners him and he says, well, actually, I don't even look at the feed. And so he contradicts himself. In other words, this individual is making claims based on information that doesn't exist. Information he's never personally seen, apparently. Information on which he can't name a single source. And if you're a journalist, part of the basic form that journalism works on is verification. As a journalist, if I'm going to accuse someone of something, I need to go and look at it. I need to go and make an effort to read it. I need to, put in some work on my own to make sure that I'm not just reporting a rumor. In other words, I need to look at the source, or at least make an effort to. And if you're not looking at the source, if you're not doing that, all you're doing is repeating narratives. And then people raise the question of, well, from where is this individual getting his narratives? It turns out he's getting his narratives from government-funded reports. This is a government-funded media getting its narratives from government-funded reports, all of which is skewed information around government talking points, as the EU is trying to crack down on Twitter. This is lack of verification, and because it is lack of verification while making accusations, really serious accusations against somebody, I would say this is a clear example of lack of integrity through a medium which is, again, government funded, citing sources funded by the same government. I'll get into that in a minute. A bit more. We'll get into that in a minute on the whole government-funded element of it. But let me show you a bit more of this because it went actually in a very interesting direction. We play a bit more.
Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time.
Wow.
COVID misinformation. You changed the COVID misinformation
Has
rules.
BBC changed its COVID misinformation?
The BBC does not set the rules on Twitter, so I'm asking you.
No, I'm talking about the BBC's misinformation about COVID.
I'm literally asking you about, you changed the labels, the COVID misinformation labels. There used to be a policy, it then disappeared. Why do that?
Well, COVID is no longer an issue. Does the BBC hold itself at all responsible for misinformation regarding masking and side effects of vaccinations, and not reporting on that at all? And what about the fact that the BBC was put under pressure by the British government to change its editorial policy? Are you aware of that?
This is not an interview about the BBC.
Oh, you thought it wasn't?
I see now why you've done Twitter Spaces. I am not a representative of the BBC's editorial policy. I want to make that clear. Let's talk about something else. If you want to talk about the BBC,
you too.
All right, let's talk about something else.
You weren't expecting that.
Let's talk about something else.
Let's talk about something else. We have limited time. The interesting way that went. Let's talk about something else. We have limited time. Elon Musk, at the end of the interview, was actually up for doing a longer interview. The BBC reporter actually left. And imagine as a journalist, you have like one of the richest guys on earth. He's the biggest story in the news, and he's offering you a long interview, and you get up and leave. And Elon Musk actually stayed even after he left and continued doing the Twitter space on his own. It's bizarre. Especially because, again, he's using this idea of limited time, suggesting Elon Musk has limited time, it appears, as a way to deflect criticism and deflect questions. Of course, the real overarching kind of context of that discussion was BBC coming out and criticizing Elon Musk for labeling them as government-funded media. And so, really, I think Elon Musk, based on the way he was, of course, kind of counter-questioning them, was also seeing it as more of a debate with BBC and what they represent, and as a way to make them kind of put their money where their mouth is. If you're going to criticize me, let's have a discussion about it. And let's do it live so people can make their own assessment. This gets into the idea of what Elon Musk has been pushing, which actually he did discuss in that interview, which I think was actually one of the more interesting points. Elon Musk actually said that what he's doing with Twitter, and again, take it for what you will. As far as I've seen, I think Epoch Times, we still can't advertise on Twitter. It looks like they're still censoring us. And so I haven't personally seen Twitter take a strong enough move, at least in my opinion. I think actually they did change it now, so good on them. Cancel that. Until recently, I just got told by my producer they did change it. So good on them. But Elon Musk said something interesting, which is what he is doing is he's changing the dynamic of who gets to basically be the gatekeeper of truth. And he's promoting what he calls citizen journalism, something that used to be a big buzzword back when, Twitter and stuff was first starting. The idea of citizen journalists, when, I guess prior to 2016, when they began launching these mass censorship operations after Trump won the election, because they wanted to make sure this never happens again. You had YouTubers coming up, you had people on Twitter coming up, you had small individuals like from their house on cheap laptops with cheap cameras with like webcams becoming some of the biggest voices in the news industry. You had little YouTubers getting more traffic than the major news outlets, more traffic, more views in a day than CNN and NBC and all that. And a big question came out: how can we remain relevant if anybody basically can become a star And how can we maintain the integrity of news if anybody can come out? If anybody could come out and gain an audience and challenge the narratives we are producing. That was, again, not me saying this, but this was the narrative a lot of the mainstream media were pushing. Now, as that took place, the solution they brought out was, well, we need to censor everybody else to an extent, or at the very least make sure that the narratives being pushed by the governments of the different parts of the world cannot be challenged by independent voices. And in reality, that's what the censorship system represents. It's the idea that established narrative cannot be questioned regardless of its accuracy. And what Elon Musk did in that interview is brought that point forward. He said, well, you're criticizing me, the narrative, right? The government narrative in both BBC and in the state-run organizations, the state-funded organizations, that produced the reports suggesting there was an increase in hate speech on Twitter after Elon Musk took over, despite the fact that, again, that's a government narrative funded by the government, promoted by government organizations, funded by government. They cannot name a single instance of it, meaning it's debatable. And what they're suggesting is you need to have censorship in place to prevent the other side of the narrative from being demonstrated. And when the individual comes out, this BBC reporter comes out and says, I can see why we did this on Twitter Spaces. That was a very telling, almost like saying the quiet part out loud moment, in my opinion. Because by stating, I can see why you wanted to do this on Twitter Spaces, what I took that as him saying, right, at least the way I interpreted that, is it seemed like he was suggesting that had they done this on the BBC, it would not be live and they could edit it. And they could remove the part where they are questioned. They could remove the part where they look bad. They can remove the part where there's an aha moment and the journalist has to answer and demonstrate the credibility of his statement, which we saw in real time that there was no credibility for these statements. At least none that the individual could remember or recall. Which again, if you're a journalist making really serious accusations against somebody, well, you better have an example to justify it. Otherwise, the way I was taught as a journalist is you could be sued. You know, if I were to come out and criticize somebody and accuse somebody of spreading hateful content, I better know like an example, if I'm going to say that. I think it's at least basic courtesy you should show people. And so it is important to do that. Anyways, bizarre stuff. But I think what you're seeing as well is this break in this system. I think that was kind of a moment in public discourse where the public got to see what the British government pressured BBC to push COVID misinformation while simultaneously criticizing Twitter of removing warning labels on COVID misinformation. Wait a second, what's going on here? They, while they are actually promoting false information, as Elon Musk put that guy in the hot seat on and called him out for directly, is BBC going to apologize for pushing false information on COVID-19? The guy was actually asking Musk, why did he remove these misinformation labels? Musk is like, well, what disinformation? Like your disinformation, the stuff you're promoting? Is disinformation true if the government says it is, regardless of whether it's true in practice? How do you define this? And should we not be able to question it? That was the base narrative that just rose to the surface through that debate. And the public got to watch it all in real time. This is the break, I would say, between state narrative and independent voice. And keep in mind, the nature of media in the past, of news outlets in the past, is they were meant to be the independent voice. Journalists, media, news outlets, they were supposed to be the fourth estate. The public body, the watchdogs, who hold to account, who weigh the truth or falsehoods of what we're being told, and who hold individuals to account when they state things falsely. Can you maintain that type of integrity if you're receiving money from the very people you're supposed to be holding to account? That is the debate we're now having as a society. Now, it got even more interesting. I'll show you this in a minute. Let's jump over to Epoch TV for the rest of this. Before we jump over, again, I do an hour-and-a-half show, so join us on Epoch TV. Before we jump over, though, let me show you a trailer, and I'll see you there. Hi there, Josh Philipp here. Our values are being assaulted every day by the lies that mainstream media perpetuate, and it's put our country on the edge of a knife, with no one knowing whether or not we'll make it. If you love our country and the freedoms we celebrate, I'll give you the number one thing you can do to ensure this country stays this way. Now, you probably feel that's impossible. Maybe you think the situation is too far gone. I felt the same way until I joined the Epoch Times, started this show, and saw the power that truth can bring our growing audience. That's why I wanted to tell you there is something you can do. You can ensure the truth gets out there from my show. And by supporting me, you're supporting the Epoch Times, and you're supporting independent journalism that is, bar none, this country's best hope in surviving the onslaught against our values and freedoms. Shockingly, most people don't even realize that almost every mainstream media company belongs to one of 6 huge corporations, all with their own agendas and demanding shareholders. Some even think it's a good thing. Folks, how can we ensure the reporting is free of bias? We can't. This is why my show and the Epoch Times is so critical. We're completely independent. Our only interest is in traditional journalism and reporting truthfully. The Epoch Times is the antidote. It's time to replace these prevalent narratives with the truth and get back to the basics. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All you have to do is subscribe to Epoch TV, and you'll get so much more in return. With your subscription, you get access to hundreds of exclusive videos, over 30 channels, live shows, events, and even hard-hitting documentaries and films that are changing the game. Just click on the link in the description of the show, and you're on your way. Thanks so much for watching me and for your support, and remember, the only way to truly protect our freedoms is to stay informed. All right, folks. As I mentioned, things only got more interesting. Again, those of you still on YouTube, jump over to Epoch TV. Come join us there for the rest of this discussion, and I'll see you there. But folks, thank you for being here. Things only got more interesting. Because do you